My name is Leona Tate, 25 years old, and the day my life unraveled started with a scream in the garage. Move your junk. My brother barked, slamming his car door. I'd parked my beat-up sedan in a spot by mistake. Before I could explain, his voice cut sharper. Dad, she's blocking my way again. I snapped back. It's just a car, chill. That was my mistake. My father's hand clamped my arm like a vice. He didn't speak, just yanked me through the side door, my feet stumbling over the concrete. I hit the ground hard. The air knocked out of me. My mother stood on the porch, arms crossed, her lips curled. She has no future anyway, she said. Cold as ice. My brother smirked, tossing my backpack toward the curb. Then my father hauled my things, my laptop, my sketchbooks, every painting I'd poured my heart into, straight to the public dumpster across the street. Useless things belong in the dump. He growled, dusting off his hands like I was dirt. Neighbors peeked through their blinds, their whispers stinging worse than the fall. My sketchbooks lay crumpled among garbage bags, my dreams torn apart. Humiliation burned, but something else sparked inside me, a fire to prove them wrong. They thought they'd broken me, but they didn't know what was coming. They'd beg for my forgiveness one day on their knees, and I'd have the last word. If you've ever been pushed down by the people who should lift you up, hit that subscribe button and drop your story in the comments. Let's show the world we're stronger than their words. That moment in the garage was just the tip of the iceberg. Living in the family house in Missoula, Montana felt like walking on eggshells. Every step carefully measured to avoid their disdain. Fresh out of art school, with a degree in fine arts, I was nothing more than a disappointment in their eyes. My brother Parker was the golden child. At 28, he strutted around as a hotshot banker. His suits crisp, his smirk sharper. My parents had paid the down payment on his sleek new condo downtown and gifted him a shiny SUV. All while I scraped by in their guest room, my painting stacked against the wall like forgotten dreams. Dad would come home from his construction management job, his boots heavy on the floor, and barely glance at me. Still no job, he'd mutter, his voice thick with judgment. My mother, always perched at the kitchen counter with her coffee, would chime in. She's just a burden, Wallace. That word burden cut deeper each time, like a blade they didn't bother to sharpen. Parker, though, was the worst. He'd saunter into my room, pick up one of my canvases, and scoff. This is worthless, he'd say, tossing it back like it was trash. Why don't you get a real job? I'd bite my tongue, my hands trembling, knowing any comeback would only make things worse. I wasn't idle. I spent hours applying to galleries across Missoula, emailing my portfolio to every art space I could find. I'd sit at the library, using their free Wi-Fi, tweaking cover letters until my eyes burned. But the responses were always the same. We're not hiring, or your work doesn't fit our vision. Each rejection chipped away at my confidence, making Parker's taunts echo louder in my head. Was he right? Were my paintings just scribbles no one would ever care about? The house itself felt like a cage. My mother assigned me endless chores, scrubbing dishes, folding laundry, vacuuming rooms I barely used just to earn my keep. Once I overheard her on the phone bragging about Parker's latest bonus, while dismissing me as that girl who thinks she's an artist. I wanted to scream to tell her I was trying, but her words always won. Dad was no better. He'd lecture me about responsibility while handing Parker cash for his next weekend getaway. When are you going to be like your brother? He'd ask, his eyes cold. I'd mumble some excuse and retreat to my room where my easel stood like a silent ally. One evening, I tried showing my mother a new painting, a swirling abstract of blues and reds, my attempt to capture the chaos I felt inside. She barely looked up from her magazine. Don't waste your time, she said, flipping a page. No one's going to buy that. I stood there, paint still smudged on my fingers, feeling smaller than ever. Parker overheard and laughed from the couch. Told you, Leona. Stick to cleaning the kitchen. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, but I didn't respond. What was the point? They'd already decided who I was. The constant comparisons to Parker were suffocating. He'd come home with stories of closing big deals, and my parents would hang on his every word, their faces glowing with pride. If I mentioned applying to a gallery, They'd roll their eyes or change the subject. Once at dinner, I mustered the courage to share that a local art fair had accepted my application. Dad cut me off mid-sentence. "Parker's up for a promotion," he said as if my news was just noise. My mother nodded, passing him the mashed potatoes while I stared at my plate, my appetite gone. I started avoiding family meals, eating alone in my room, my laptop balanced on my knees as I scrolled through job boards. The rejections piled up, each one a reminder of my place in their world. My paintings, once my escape, began to feel like a burden, too. I'd stare at them, wondering if I was fooling myself. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe they were right. But there were moments, small, fleeting ones, where I'd pick up a brush and lose myself in the canvas. The colors would flow. And for a few hours, I wasn't the family failure. I was just Leona painting what no one else could see. Those moments kept me going even as the house closed in around me. I didn't know how much longer I could stand it, but I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. A few days later, a small argument turned my life upside down. It started in the garage, where I'd left my easel leaning against the wall to finish a painting. Parker stormed in his car keys, jangling his face twisted with irritation. "Leona, your junk's in my space again," he snapped, kicking a paint tube across the floor. I was exhausted from another round of job rejections. My patience paper thin. "It's just an easel, Parker." I shot back, my voice sharper than I meant. "Move your car around it." His eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, towering over me. "You don't get to talk back to me," he hissed, then yelled. "Dad, she's blocking my way again." My father's heavy footsteps thundered from the house. Before I could move, his hand gripped my shoulder, shoving me toward the side door. "Enough of this," he roared. I stumbled, catching myself on the door frame, my heart pounding. "You're always causing trouble," he said, his voice low and final. He didn't wait for a reply. He grabbed my laptop from the workbench, my sketchbooks from a shelf, and a box of my clothes from the corner. I froze, watching as he marched across the street to the public dumpster, his arms full. One by one, he hurled my things into the heap. My laptop cracked against the metal. My paintings crumpled among rotting food. My papers scattered in the wind. "If you can't respect this house, you don't belong here," he said, brushing his hands as if he'd just finished a chore. My mother appeared on the porch. Her arms folded, her expression blank. "You're better off gone," she said, her words slicing through me. I opened my mouth to protest, but nothing came out. Parker stood behind her, a smug grin on his face, tossing my backpack onto the lawn like an afterthought. "Good riddance," he muttered loud enough for me to hear. The neighbors' curtains twitched, their eyes boring into me, but no one said a word. My cheeks burned, not from anger, but from the weight of their stares. Everything I owned, my tools, my art, my identity, was now garbage in their eyes. I grabbed my backpack, my hands shaking as I slung it over my shoulder. Inside were a few pencils, a half-empty sketch pad, and a phone with a dying battery. No money, no plan, no place to go. I started walking, my legs heavy, my mind a blur. The streets stretched endlessly before me, and for the first time, I felt truly alone. I didn't know where I was headed, only that I couldn't stay. The thought of begging them to take me back crossed my mind, but their words, burden, worthless, better off gone, echoed too loudly. I'd rather sleep on the street than crawl back to that house. I'd made it 2 blocks when a voice called out, "Leona, wait." I turned to see Mrs. Marigold Walsh, our neighbor, hurrying toward me, her cardigan flapping in the breeze. Her face was creased with worry, her eyes flicking back toward the dumpster. "I saw what happened," she said, her voice soft but firm. "That wasn't right." She pressed a crumpled $50 bill into my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "Take this. It's not much, but it'll help." I tried to refuse, but she shook her head. "There's someone you should meet. Seth Cole, a painter who runs a small gallery downtown. He's a good man, and he might have work for you. Go see him." I clutched the money, my throat tight. Mrs. Walsh's kindness was a lifeline, a flicker of hope in the darkness. I nodded, unable to speak, and she gave me a small smile before turning back. As I walked away, the weight of my family's rejection pressed down, but Mrs. Walsh's words lingered. Seth Cole, a gallery, a chance. I didn't know if it would lead anywhere, but I had nothing left to lose. My feet kept moving, carrying me toward an uncertain future, one step at a time. The next morning, I walked into Seth Cole's studio, a cramped space filled with the scent of paint. My hands still trembled from the night before, clutching the $50 Mrs. Walsh had given me. Seth, a wiry man with flecks of blue paint in his beard, looked up from a canvas. "You must be Leona," he said, his voice gruff but kind. Marigold said, "You're an artist. Let's see what you've got." I hesitated, my backpack heavy with just a sketch pad and a few pencils. Everything else, my laptop. My paintings lay ruined in a dumpster. But I nodded, swallowing my doubts, and took my first step into a new life. Seth put me to work as his assistant, and it was grueling. My day started at dawn, mixing paints until my fingers ached, cleaning brushes until my hands cramped. He taught me to blend colors for abstract swirls of crimson and indigo that felt like pouring my heart onto canvas. "Art isn't just beauty," Seth said one afternoon, his eyes sharp. "It's pain, Leona. Use it. Make it yours." His words hit hard, stirring something I hadn't felt in months. I'd lost so much, but maybe I could rebuild through my art. I started sketching again late at night on borrowed paper, each stroke a small rebellion against the family that had cast me out. The work was relentless. I'd haul canvases across the studio, my arms burning, and spend hours perfecting brush strokes under Seth's watchful eye. He showed me how to paint portraits, capturing the flicker of emotion in a stranger's face. "Feel their story," he'd say, pointing at a half-finished canvas. "That's what makes it real." My hands blistered, my back ached, but every ache felt like proof I was still here, still fighting. I wasn't the burden my family had called me. I was learning, growing, becoming something new. One rainy afternoon, a woman walked into the studio, her heels clicking on the floor. "I'm Courtney Hayes," she said, introducing herself as an event planner browsing for art for a charity auction. She stopped at a small abstract I'd painted, a chaotic burst of blues and yellows. My attempt to capture the storm inside me. "This is incredible," she said, her eyes wide. "Did you do this?" I nodded, bracing for criticism, but she smiled. "You've got real talent, Leona. Ever thought about sharing this online?" I shook my head, unsure. My family's words, worthless, useless, still lingered, making me doubt my worth. Courtney wasn't deterred. "You should be on Instagram," she said, pulling out her phone to show me artists posting their work. "People would love this, but maybe use a different name, something fresh." "Start over," she paused, then grinned. "How about Clara Vale? Sounds like an artist who's going places." I laughed for the first time in weeks, the idea sparking a flicker of hope. Clara Vale, a name that wasn't tied to my past, to the family who'd thrown me away. I thanked her, my voice shaky, and she bought the painting on the spot, slipping me her card. "Post your work, Clara," she said. "I'll spread the word." That night, I sat on the cot Seth had lent me in the studio's back room, my sketch pad open. I didn't have a phone plan anymore, but I used the studio's Wi-Fi to set up an Instagram account under Clara Vale. My first post was a photo of a new sketch, a jagged mix of reds and blacks, raw and unpolished. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the share button. What if no one cared? What if my family was right? But Seth's words echoed. "Use your pain." I hit post, my heart racing, and watched the screen, half expecting nothing. To my shock, a few likes trickled and then comments. "Stunning. So emotional." Strangers saw something in my work that my family never did. Over the next weeks, I threw myself into painting. Seth pushed me harder, teaching me to layer colors for depth, to let my brush strokes breathe. My hands grew steadier, my confidence creeping back. I'd stay up late, sketching under a dim lamp. Each piece a step away from the girl who'd been kicked out. Courtney checked in, texting me about local art shows and promising to connect me with her contacts. Her belief in me felt like a lifeline pulling me forward. I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time, I felt like I was running towards something, not away. Weeks later, my Instagram page as Clara Vale started to grow. Each post felt like a small victory, a brushstroke against the doubts that had haunted me. I'd spend hours in Seth's studio refining my technique, painting abstracts that poured out my anger and hope in waves of color. My latest piece, a storm of deep purples and fiery oranges, felt alive like it carried every sleepless night I'd endured. Seth nodded when he saw it, his usual gruffness softening. "That's it, Leona," he said. "You're finding your voice." His words fueled me, pushing me to create more, to dig deeper into the emotions I'd buried. One morning, a notification pinged on my borrowed phone. A woman named Mrs. Zelda Ross, a retiree in her 70s, had messaged me on Instagram. "Your painting spoke to me," she wrote. "It reminds me of my own struggles. Can I commission one?" My heart raced. My first real order. I met Mrs. Ross at a coffee shop, her silver hair catching the light as she shared stories of her youth-loss resilience, starting over. I painted her a custom piece, a swirling blend of blues and golds that mirrored her strength. When I delivered it, her eyes welled up. "This is my life on canvas," she said, pressing a check into my hand. That money felt heavier than the $50 I'd started with, like proof I could make it. Courtney kept her promise to help. She texted me about a local gallery looking for new artists and insisted I submit my portfolio. "Your work's too good to stay hidden," she said, her enthusiasm infectious. She also set up an Etsy shop for me, uploading photos of my paintings with captions that made them sound like treasures. Orders trickled in a small canvas here, a print there. Each sale chipped away at my fear, replacing it with a quiet pride. I wasn't just surviving. I was building something real. With my earnings, I bought a used laptop from a pawn shop, its keys worn, but functional. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I stayed up late managing my Etsy shop and posting new sketches as Clara Vale. The likes and comments kept coming, strangers calling my work powerful raw. One buyer wrote, "This painting feels like it's speaking to me." I read that message over and over, my chest tight, with something I hadn't felt in years, validation. Courtney's connections opened more doors. A second gallery agreed to display one of my pieces, and a local art fair invited me to set up a booth. I was still scraping by, but I had momentum. Then one evening, I took a leap. Using my savings, I signed a lease for a tiny studio apartment in Missoula. A single room with creaky floors and a lumpy mattress. But it was my own. No more sleeping on Seth's cot. No more feeling like a guest in someone else's world. I hung a new painting on the wall. Its bold reds a reminder of the fire inside me. For the first time, I felt free, like I was finally standing on my own. But that freedom came with a sting. One night, scrolling through Instagram, I stumbled on a post from a local caterer. It showed a lavish setup for a birthday gala at a fancy venue in Missoula. Crystal chandeliers, gold tablecloths, a towering cake. The caption mentioned the Tate family celebrating Parker's 29th birthday. My stomach twisted. My father, my mother, and Parker were throwing a party like royalty, as if they hadn't thrown me out like garbage months ago. The post showed Parker grinning in a tailored suit, his arm around a woman I didn't recognize, while my parents beamed beside him. They looked untouched, unbothered, living a life of luxury, while I'd been picking up the pieces of mine. I sat on my bed, staring at the screen, my hands clenched. Part of me wanted to scream, to confront them for acting like I'd never existed. But another part, the part that had painted for Mrs. Ross, that had built Claraville, knew I was better than their indifference. They could have their gala, their perfect image. I had my art, my apartment, my name. I wasn't the burden they'd called me anymore. I was Clara, and I was just getting started. One evening, an email from my mother landed like a stone in my inbox. The subject read, "Commission request for Parker's birthday." My heart pounded. She didn't know Claraville was me. She'd seen my Instagram posts, admired the raw abstracts, and wanted one for Parker's lavish gala. "We need a bold centerpiece," she wrote, her tone cold and professional, as if I were just another vendor. "It's for my son's celebration." My hands shook with a mix of fury and resolve. This was my moment, not just to paint, but to force them to see the pain they had caused. I replied, agreeing to deliver the painting in person. My plan taking shape. In my small apartment, I poured every ounce of my hurt into a canvas. The painting was a tempest of jagged blacks and fiery reds with sharp grays slicing through like silent screams. It captured the night they broke me. My father's grip pushing me out, my mother's cruel words cutting deep, Parker's mocking laughter ringing in my ears. Each stroke was a reckoning, raw and unyielding. On the back, I wrote in bold ink, "This is how you treated me." I sealed it with varnish, the message hidden, but ready. This wasn't just art. It was my truth, and I would unveil it myself. The night of Parker's gala, I walked into the venue, the wrapped canvas heavy in my arms. The room buzzed with Missoula's elite banker socialites, Parker's colleagues in tailored suits. My mother spotted me first, her smile faltering as she registered my face. "Leona," she whispered, confusion creasing her brow. I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped to the center of the room where a spotlight waited for the unveiling. "I'm Clara Vale," I announced, my voice steady, cutting through the chatter. Gasps rippled around me. A woman in a silk gown leaned forward, whispering, "The artist from Instagram." Parker's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to my father, who stood rigid near the bar. I unwrapped the canvas and held it high, letting the crowd see the storm of colors. Murmurs of awe filled the room until I turned it over, revealing the message. "This is how you treated me." The words echoed in the stunned silence. A banker, one of Parker's senior colleagues, stepped closer, his face darkening. "Is this about you, Leona?" he asked, his voice loud enough to draw every eye. I nodded, unflinching. "This is what they did to me." The crowd erupted in whispers. A woman in a sharp blazer, another colleague, turned to Parker, her expression cold. "You threw out your own sister," she said, her tone sharp with disgust. A local lawyer shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable." My mother tried to intervene, her voice shaky. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, but no one listened. My father's face burned red, his fists clenched as he pushed through the crowd toward the exit. Parker stood frozen, his polished charm shattered as his boss, a gay-haired executive, stepped away from him, his gaze icy. Guests began to leave, their murmurs turning to outright condemnation. "Disgraceful," one said, tossing her napkin on a gold-draped table. The towering cake sat untouched, the chandeliers mocking the Tate family's ruined image. My friend from the catering crew texted me later. "They're humiliated. Parker's colleagues won't even look at him." By morning, the story was everywhere. Instagram and X posts exploded, tagging Clara Vale and sharing photos of the painting. "Local artist exposes family abuse at gala." One headline read, "My followers surged not just for the art, but for the courage behind it." The painting became a symbol shared and reposted thousands of times, sparking conversations about family and truth. I didn't expect the attention, but it felt right, like my pain had finally found a voice. 2 days later, an email from Parker arrived. "Leona, I'm sorry," it began, his words, stiff, insincere. "We didn't mean for this. Can we talk?" I remembered his smirk, his taunts about my worthless art. This wasn't an apology. It was panic. I deleted it without a second thought. My heart steady. I didn't need their regret or their approval. I had my art, my home, my name, Clara Vale, and a world that was finally listening. The morning after Parker's birthday, Missoula was alive with gossip about the Tate family. My painting with its stark message had ignited a firestorm online, and Clara's name was on everyone's lips. I walked into a local gallery that had once rejected me, only to find them eager to host my work. The Clara Vale exhibit opened a week later, drawing art lovers who stood before my canvases, whispering about their raw power. Each painting, blues crashing into golds, reds bleeding into grays, told a piece of my story, and the crowds couldn't get enough. A local critic called my work a voice for the silenced. And for the first time, I felt seen, not as the girl my family discarded, but as an artist with something to say. The fallout for the Tates was brutal. Parker's bank, shaken by the gala scandal, let him go. A colleague had posted online calling his actions unforgivable, and clients pulled their accounts unwilling to work with someone tied to such a public disgrace. My mother and father faced their own reckoning. Invitations to their usual social events dried up their names, whispered with pity or scorn at country club lunches. A neighbor told me my mother had tried hosting a book club only for half the guests to cancel, citing personal conflicts. The Tate family, once a pillar of Missoula's elite, was unraveling, their polished image reduced to a cautionary tale. I didn't revel in their downfall. Instead, I turned my focus to something bigger. Courtney reached out with an invitation to a charity auction, urging me to donate a painting. I chose the piece from Parker's gala, the one that had exposed my family's cruelty. At the auction, I stood before a packed room, my voice steady as I shared my story, the night I was thrown out, the years of being called worthless, and how I rebuilt myself as Claraville. The crowd listened, some wiping tears, others nodding in solidarity. When the bidding began, hands shot up, driving the price to a staggering $15,000. A local philanthropist won, calling it a testament to survival. I donated every cent to a new scholarship fund for children escaping family abuse, naming it Bright Futures. The fund would cover school supplies, therapy, and art classes, giving kids like me a chance to heal through creativity. The announcement sparked applause, and I felt a weight lift. My pain had become a beacon for others. My mother's emails started arriving soon after, each one more desperate. "Leona, please," she wrote in one. "We made mistakes, but we're family." I read her words, remembering her cold dismissal, her silence as my father shoved me out. I didn't reply. I blocked her address. Then Parker's cutting the last ties to a past that no longer defined me. My worth wasn't theirs to validate. It came from the resilience I'd forged, the art I'd created, the lives I was now helping. With Courtney's connections, my career soared. She introduced me to curators in Seattle and Portland, and soon my paintings were shipping across the country. Seth, still my mentor, pushed me to experiment with new techniques, blending textures to capture joy as fiercely as I'd once captured pain. I worked late nights in my apartment, my small space alive with sketches and canvases. Each sale, each review was a step further from the girl who'd been called a burden. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving, building a life on my own terms. Looking back, I realized the lesson that carried me through my value didn't come from my family's approval or their rejection. It came from the strength I found in myself, from turning pain into art, from creating something beautiful out of the ashes. Claraville wasn't just a name. It was a promise to keep going, to keep creating no matter